Hello everyone, and welcome back to RealFear Files. Tonight we're diving into 9 truly chilling encounters that unfolded on the coldest, darkest nights of November, when the air turns sharp, the shadows stretch longer, and something unexplainable stirs just beyond the reach of light. In this episode, we'll revisit accounts of people who met their deepest fears during that cruel transition between autumn and winter. Stories of unseen watchers, desperate intruders, and moments where safety shattered in an instant. Each case you're about to hear was reconstructed from real testimonies and verified reports. Some details and names have been altered for privacy, but the fear, that's all too real. If you're new here, be sure to subscribe to RealFear Files for true horror stories that'll follow you into your dreams. Turn on notifications, because when night falls, fear doesn't wait. Now, let's begin with one of the most disturbing stories of all. A story that will make you question just how safe you really are inside your own home. Camilla always loved November. She found peace in its silence. The way the wind grew still, the trees stood bare and honest, and the world seemed to slow down beneath the heavy clouds. The first snow of the season always felt magical to her. Calm, cleansing, and safe. She lived alone in a cozy second-floor apartment at the edge of town, in a neighborhood where doors were left unlocked and neighbors waved from their porches. It was the kind of place where nothing bad ever seemed to happen. At least, that's what everyone thought. That illusion would crumble one freezing November evening. An evening that would change the way Camilla looked at her home forever. The local news had been warning for days about a major snowstorm headed straight toward the region. Meteorologists said it could be the first true blizzard of the year. Heavy snowfall, strong winds, and temperatures that could freeze exposed skin in minutes. Camilla had prepared for it the day before. Her pantry was full. Her heater worked perfectly, and she planned to stay inside until the storm passed. But by late afternoon, the snow still hadn't started falling, and her golden retriever, Murphy, had other ideas. He whined at the door, tail wagging, eager for his usual walk. Camilla sighed, bundled up in her thick winter coat, wound a scarf around her neck, and clipped the leash to Murphy's collar. She figured a quick walk around the block wouldn't hurt. The snow would be here soon, but not yet. The moment she stepped outside, the air bit into her skin. The cold was sharp and dry, the kind that stole your breath if you inhaled too deeply. Above her, the sky churned with dark clouds, heavy and gray, snow waiting to fall. Streetlights flickered on as dusk crept over the quiet neighborhood. The streets were mostly empty, just a few cars moving slowly through the growing wind. Murphy trotted happily beside her, sniffing every post and patch of frozen grass, completely unaware of the storm, or the danger looming ahead. The walk lasted about 20 minutes. By the time Camilla returned to her building, fat flakes had begun drifting lazily from the sky. She hurried up the steps to her apartment, brushing the snow from her coat. As she opened the door and stepped inside, something in her gut twisted. She stopped cold in the entryway, one boot still half off. Something felt wrong. The air inside was different. Heavy, stale, and laced with a faint, unfamiliar scent. Not unpleasant, but out of place. It smelled faintly like someone else. Camilla's pulse quickened. Her eyes darted across the living room. Everything looked normal at first. The couch, the coffee table, the faint glow of her TV's standby light. But then she noticed the details. The coat closet door, normally shut tight, was cracked open. The throw pillows on the couch were arranged differently. And one of her kitchen cabinets hung slightly ajar, a mug peeking out from the edge. Camilla froze. She never left cabinets open. The realization hit her like ice water. Someone had been here. Her heart hammered as she scanned the room again, every shadow suddenly alive with possibility. Was whoever had done this still here? For a split second, she thought about running outside. But Murphy was already trotting around the living room, sniffing curiously, his tail still wagging. Maybe she was overreacting. Maybe she'd just forgotten to close things. She took a shaky breath and forced herself to move forward, locking the door behind her. The apartment was silent except for Murphy's nails tapping on the floor. Camilla walked slowly through each room, trying to calm her racing thoughts. The kitchen seemed fine, except for that cabinet. The bathroom too, though her towel was now on the floor instead of hanging neatly on the rack. She knew she hadn't left it that way. Her throat tightened. Whoever had been inside had touched everything, even the smallest details. Finally, she turned toward her bedroom. The door was closed, just as she'd left it. Her trembling hand reached for the knob. She pushed it open slowly, eyes scanning every inch of the room. Her bed was neatly made, the dresser untouched, curtains drawn. Then she saw it. The closet door. A narrow gap, just wide enough to reveal blackness within. Camilla froze. Her pulse pounded so hard it hurt. She always closed her closet. Always. The silence was unbearable. Then, from within that narrow crack came a faint sound. The soft, unmistakable rustle of fabric brushing against fabric. Her breath hitched. Someone was in there. Her instincts took over. She turned and bolted from the room, slamming the door behind her, heart pounding so loud she could barely hear herself think. She grabbed her phone with trembling hands and dialed 911. The dispatcher's calm voice grounded her just enough to explain. "Someone's in my apartment, in my closet." The operator told her to leave immediately and wait for the officers outside. Camilla snatched Murphy's leash, yanked the front door open, and fled into the storm. Snow whipped across her face as she stumbled down the stairs, her dog pulling her forward. She didn't stop until she was standing on the icy sidewalk, shivering not from cold but from pure terror. Moments later, the distant wail of sirens echoed through the snow-covered streets. 2 officers pulled up, their flashlights cutting through the swirling white haze. Camilla met them halfway, voice trembling as she described what happened and pointed to her apartment window. The officers exchanged grim looks. One instructed her to stay outside. The other nodded and disappeared up the stairs. She waited in the storm, seconds stretching into minutes. The sound of the wind filled her ears. Every flake of snow seemed too loud, every shadow too deep. Then, movement. An officer appeared in her doorway and gestured for her to come up. Her legs felt weak as she climbed the steps, Murphy trailing behind her. Inside, the warm air hit her face, and she could see both officers in the living room. One was speaking into his radio, requesting backup. The other stood near her couch, his expression dark. They had found him. A man. He was sitting on the floor, his hands cuffed behind his back, head bowed. His clothes were filthy, his hair tangled and greasy. His skin looked gray under the harsh light. Camilla's stomach twisted as she realized this stranger, this man she had never seen before, had been hiding in her home. The officers explained that he'd been inside the closet when they opened it, crouched in the dark among her clothes. When they tried to pull him out, he'd fought, but they overpowered him quickly. As they searched the apartment, the horrifying truth emerged. This wasn't the first time he'd been there. Evidence suggested he'd been slipping into Camilla's apartment for weeks. He'd eaten her food, used her bathroom, even slept in her bed when she was at work. The thought made her skin crawl. Every memory of home, every night she'd felt alone, warped into something sinister. The man had apparently been using a broken window latch at the back of the building to enter and leave without being seen. He'd come and gone while she was out, living in her space like a ghost. That night, though, the snowstorm had trapped him. When Camilla left to walk Murphy, he hadn't had time to escape, so he hid, planning to wait until she slept before sneaking out. But she'd noticed. She'd trusted her instincts, and that saved her. Police later learned the man had been breaking into other apartments in nearby neighborhoods, all belonging to women who lived alone. He always struck during November storms, when the streets were empty and noises could be blamed on the wind. Camilla's call ended a pattern that might have continued for months. He was charged with multiple counts of breaking and entering, trespassing, and stalking. Eventually, he was convicted and sent to prison. But for Camilla, the nightmare didn't end there. The man was gone, but the fear remained. Every creak in her apartment, every misplaced object, sent her heart racing. She changed every lock, installed security cameras, and kept every window sealed tight. She even thought about moving, but she refused to surrender her home to fear. Still, something inside her had changed. The soft beauty of November's first snow no longer brought her peace. It reminded her of that night, of standing outside, trembling as the snow fell around her, watching strangers lead another stranger out of her home. Years later, she still double-checks her closets. She still glances over her shoulder when unlocking her door. That primal fear never completely left her, but neither did her strength. Because Camilla survived what could have been much worse, and she never forgot the lesson she learned that night. That safety is fragile, an illusion we cling to until it breaks, and sometimes the real monsters aren't in the dark outside, but quietly waiting in the places we call home. For almost 5 years, Gabriel had taken the same drive home after work, a long, narrow highway that wound through miles of open farmland. It was the kind of route where radio static was your only company, and headlights of other cars were a rarity. By day it was peaceful, a quiet stretch of road surrounded by endless fields and the occasional weather-beaten barn. But when night came, and the November fog crept in, everything changed. The calmness turned to isolation. Familiar shapes melted into the mist. The road became something else entirely, a place that felt wrong. And one night, Gabriel discovered just how wrong it could be. It was a Thursday in mid-November, colder than usual, and Gabriel was working late, again. He'd stayed to finish a project due the next morning, and by the time he shut off his office light and stepped into the parking lot, it was nearly 11 p.m. The air had turned brutally cold. His breath hung in front of him in white clouds as he hurried to his car. Once inside, he started the engine, turned the heater on full blast, and merged onto the deserted highway that would lead him home. The drive was about 40 minutes. At first, it was uneventful. The hum of the tires, the soft drone of the engine, the rhythm of routine. But, as he left the glow of town behind, the fog began to appear. At first it was nothing, thin threads of mist gliding over the asphalt. Then, it thickened, rolling in like a tide. Within minutes, the beams of his headlights could barely cut more than 20 feet ahead. The world outside became nothing but gray. Gabriel slowed down, gripping the wheel tightly. He'd driven through fog before. This area was known for it every November. But tonight felt off. The fog didn't just hang in the air. It pressed against the car windows, alive somehow, swirling in shapes that didn't quite make sense. He shook the feeling away. He was tired. Just tired. 15 minutes into the drive, Gabriel saw something up ahead. A shape emerging at the edge of the headlights. A person. Someone was walking along the shoulder of the road, heading the same direction he was. He squinted, leaning closer to the windshield. The figure moved stiffly, wearing clothes so dark they seemed to absorb the light. Their arms hung straight down, motionless, their steps slow and mechanical. Gabriel eased the car to the side as he passed, curiosity battling unease. He couldn't see the person's face, just the back of their head disappearing into the fog as his car went by. Weird, he thought, but not impossible. Maybe their car had broken down, maybe they lived nearby. He tried to shake off the discomfort crawling up his spine. But as he glanced into the rearview mirror, the figure was still there, shrinking into the fog behind him until it vanished completely. He pressed on. 5 minutes later, Gabriel's pulse quickened. The same shape emerged again, on the same side of the road, walking the same way. No, that couldn't be right. His stomach dropped as the figure came into view, identical in every way. The same dark clothing, the same rigid gait, the same hanging arms. Gabriel slowed down to a crawl, staring out the window as he passed. The person's face was still obscured, their head tilted slightly downward, swallowed by fog and shadow. He could feel the hair on the back of his neck stand up. His brain scrambled for logic. Maybe it was someone else. Maybe two people were walking tonight wearing the same thing, moving the same way. But deep down he knew that wasn't true. It was the same person. Somehow, impossibly, they were ahead of him again. Gabriel's fingers tightened around the steering wheel until his knuckles went white. He pressed harder on the accelerator, pushing past the fog, heart thundering. The figure faded behind him once more. Another 5 minutes crawled by. The fog thickened until it felt suffocating. His windshield glowed white, and his headlights barely made a dent in the dense mist. Then, there it was again. The same silhouette, standing in the same place, walking in that same lifeless, mechanical way. A surge of cold dread flooded Gabriel's chest. This wasn't possible. This wasn't real. He wanted to stop, to turn around. But the thought of passing that thing again filled him with pure panic. So, instead, he did the only thing that made sense to him in that moment. He drove faster. The speedometer crept past 50, then 60. The fog tore past him in ribbons of white. He told himself, if he just kept going, he'd outrun it. Whatever it was. It wasn't human. It couldn't be. 10 minutes later, through the haze, Gabriel saw a faint glow in the distance. A small gas station. Relief washed through him like warmth after a long freeze. Finally, somewhere safe. Somewhere real. He pulled into the cracked parking lot, exhaling shakily as he put the car in park. The place looked old, a single flickering sign, faded paint, and one buzzing fluorescent light over the entrance. But right now, it felt like salvation. He stepped out, his boots crunching on gravel, and glanced down the road he'd just driven. The fog was thicker than ever, swirling under the lights like smoke. There was no sign of the figure. Good. Inside, the store was bright and warm. almost too bright after the darkness outside. Behind the counter sat an older man, half hidden behind a newspaper. Gabriel made his way to the coolers at the back, grabbed a bottle of water, and approached the counter. As he paid, he hesitated. Part of him wanted to ask the man if he'd seen anyone walking along the highway. But how would that sound? That he'd passed the same person 3 times in 3 different places. Even he didn't believe it. He swallowed the thought, thanked the clerk, and stepped back into the cold. The night air hit him like ice. He headed quickly toward his car, but stopped. Because standing just beyond the gas station lights, half hidden by fog, was the figure. Gabriel froze. It was facing him now. Facing the gas station. He couldn't see a face, just darkness where a face should be. But he could feel it watching him. The thing didn't move, didn't speak. It just stood there, still and silent, its outline sharp against the swirling fog. Gabriel's body reacted before his mind did. He lunged for the door handle, jumped inside, and slammed the lock shut. His heart hammered against his ribs. He started the engine with shaking hands, threw the car into reverse, and peeled out of the parking lot so fast his tires screamed against the pavement. He didn't look back. He couldn't. The highway stretched ahead, swallowed by mist. His speed climbed past 70. The fog blurred everything outside into shifting shadows. But he didn't care. He just needed to get home, to get away. 15 minutes to go. He gripped the wheel, knuckles white, his breath coming in sharp bursts. He refused to glance out the side windows. He didn't want to see the edge of the road. Didn't want to see if the figure was there again. The drive felt endless. Time lost meaning inside the fog. Finally, the familiar green sign for his neighborhood appeared through the haze. He took the exit too quickly, tires skidding on the wet pavement, but he didn't slow down. He just needed to be home. The quiet suburban streets looked eerie under the fog. Every street lamp haloed in white, every house asleep. He pulled into his driveway, slammed the car into park, and sat there for several seconds, his heart racing. Then, forcing himself to move, he got out and went to his front door. His hands were shaking as he unlocked it. Once inside, he threw the deadbolt, locked the chain, and leaned against the door, breathing hard. He turned to the window. Outside, the street was still. No figure, no movement, just fog and silence. Gabriel didn't sleep that night. He sat on his couch, every light in the house on, the bottle of water from the gas station untouched on the table. Had it been real? Had exhaustion and fog twisted his mind? He didn't know. But he couldn't forget the image. That still, faceless shape watching from the edge of the light. Over the following days, Gabriel couldn't stop thinking about it. He started asking quietly, a question here, a casual mention there, if anyone else had ever seen something strange on that road. And to his surprise, a few had. A woman he worked with said she'd seen a person walking that same stretch of highway last November. No face, no movement, just appearing over and over as if the road looped around them. Another man said his brother once drove that route at night years ago and swore someone had followed his car through the fog. He'd never taken that road again. Different people, different years, but always the same month. Always the same conditions. The thick November fog. Some called it a ghost, a lost traveler still wandering the highway where they'd died. Others believed it was something else, something that didn't belong to this world. Gabriel didn't know what to believe. He only knew one thing for certain. He would never drive that road again after dark. Not in November. Not when the fog rolled in thick enough to hide the world. because whatever was walking that lonely stretch of highway was still out there, waiting in the mist. And if you ever find yourself driving through a foggy November night, you might see it too. Rowan had always dreamed of becoming an author. Not just a casual writer, but one whose novels filled bookstore shelves. Heavy, celebrated tomes that people carried to cafes and read on long train rides. The kind of author whose words outlived them. But to create something like that, Rowan needed time, space, and quiet. 3 things that city life made impossible. So when an online ad appeared for a remote cabin in the northern woods, available for an unbelievably low price, it felt like fate itself was offering an escape. The listing promised absolute solitude. No neighbors, no phone service, no distractions. Just the forest, a roof, and silence. It was early November when Rowan packed the car and began the 3-hour drive north. The farther they drove, the more civilization melted away. The trees stood bare, stripped by autumn's retreat, their skeletal branches clawing at a dull gray sky. Brown leaves blanketed the ground, whispering beneath the tires as the narrow road wound deeper into the forest. By the time Rowan reached the cabin, the sun was sinking low, spilling golden light across the clearing. The cabin looked exactly as described, small, old, and lonely. Its wooden boards were weathered gray with age, the front porch sagged in the middle, and a stone chimney leaned slightly to one side. It looked tired, but it stood. And in that moment, to Rowan, it looked perfect. Inside, the air smelled faintly of pine and dust. The cabin had just enough. One large room with a small kitchen, a wood stove, a table, and a bedroom tucked behind a narrow doorway. The bathroom looked like it had been built later, as an afterthought. Every step across the floorboards made the old wood groan in protest. But once a fire was lit in the stove, the place warmed quickly. The silence was absolute. No horns, no sirens, not even a neighbor's dog. Just wind moving through the trees, and the occasional creak as the cabin settled into the cold night. Rowan couldn't remember the last time life had been so still. For the first 2 days, everything was perfect. The words came effortlessly. Hours passed unnoticed as paragraphs filled the screen. Rowan felt more focused, more alive than ever. The peace of the forest felt like fuel. But on the 3rd day, something changed. While shifting the small table closer to the window for better light, Rowan noticed something odd. One of the floorboards near the far wall sat slightly higher than the rest. Curious, Rowan knelt and pried at the edge until it popped loose. Beneath it was a small hollow space, dark and dusty but not empty. Inside was a plastic bag, old and yellowed with age. Rowan pulled it out carefully, heart beating faster with an inexplicable mix of excitement and unease. The bag contained several objects, some newspaper clippings, a few black and white photographs, and a folded piece of lined paper so faded it looked nearly translucent. The air around the table seemed heavier as Rowan spread everything out under the lamp. The newspaper clippings were brittle, their headlines grim and bold. Each one was dated from the same month, November 1978. Local woman missing in rural county. Body discovered near remote cabin. Police investigate possible homicide. The victim's name was Claire Jensen, a 26-year-old school teacher who had lived alone in a cabin not far from town. She had disappeared on November 12th, and her body had been found days later behind a barn that once stood on the property. The articles mentioned few details, only that her death had been ruled a homicide and that the killer was never caught. Rowan froze. The realization sank in like ice water. This was her cabin. The same cabin Claire Jensen had lived in, died in, and been found behind. Why had these clippings been hidden here, and by whom? Rowan picked up the old photographs next. They were faded but clear enough to make out the setting, the same cabin, though decades younger. One photo showed the barn still standing, tall but leaning, its roof half collapsed. In the shadowed doorway, a figure stood, too far away to identify, but the way they held themselves made Rowan's skin crawl. Then there was the letter. A short, trembling message written in shaky handwriting. I know what happened to Claire. I saw him. But no one will believe me. God forgive me. It wasn't signed. There was no date. But whoever wrote it had been here. And they'd known something. Something terrible. Rowan sat there for a long time, staring at the letter, the photos, the brittle papers spread across the wooden table. The cabin no longer felt like a refuge. The air felt charged, almost alive with something unseen. Still, Rowan didn't leave. Maybe it was curiosity, or the growing sense that fate had led them here for a reason. Maybe it was empathy for the woman whose story had been buried and forgotten. That night, as Rowan sat by the wood stove trying to write, the cabin began to change. It started small. The faint sound of floorboards shifting when there was no wind. A door that had been shut earlier now standing ajar. Then came the slow, deliberate footsteps on the porch. Rowan froze, listening. The footsteps stopped right outside the door. But when Rowan opened it, the porch was empty, the fog thick and unmoving. Later came the noises from the back of the property. Soft scraping sounds, like something heavy being dragged across the dirt where the barn once stood. Rowan tried to rationalize it. Old cabins made noise. The wind could sound like movement. Maybe it was an animal. But deep down, Rowan knew that wasn't true. This wasn't the wind. This was her. Claire. Unable to sleep, Rowan searched for more information on the case. The internet connection was weak but enough to pull up archived articles. The story matched everything found under the floor. Claire's murder had gone cold within months. No witnesses, no physical evidence, and no clear motive. She'd been known as kind, intelligent, well-liked. The police had assumed it was the work of a transient, someone passing through who'd seen a woman living alone. But the letter suggested something very different. Whoever wrote it hadn't been a stranger. They'd been close enough to see. Around 3 a.m. it happened. Rowan looked up from the laptop and she was there. Standing silently in the bedroom doorway was a woman. Young, pale, her long hair falling over her shoulders. Her dress was plain, her expression hollow but not angry, just unbearably sad. Rowan's breath caught. The air grew still. They didn't move. Neither did she. The woman lifted one trembling hand and pointed toward the back of the cabin, toward the space where the barn used to be. Then, just as quietly as she'd appeared, she was gone. When morning finally came, Rowan bundled up and stepped outside. The forest was still, coated in frost. Behind the cabin, only the faint outline of the barn's foundation remained. A rectangle of rotted wood and stone, swallowed by weeds and leaves. Rowan searched carefully, unsure what to look for but unable to stop. Then something caught their eye, a small dip in the earth, barely noticeable unless you were searching. Kneeling, Rowan brushed away the leaves. The soil beneath was softer than the rest. After a few minutes of digging, fingers struck something solid. A small metal box, rusted and cold. Heart pounding, Rowan pried it open. Inside were several old photographs and a small leather-bound notebook. The cover was cracked, the pages yellowed but legible. The first line on the inside cover made Rowan's stomach twist. Property of Harold Sykes. The name appeared in the old newspaper articles. Harold Sykes, a local handyman who had worked for Claire Jensen. Rowan turned the pages slowly, dread building with every entry. The writing began innocently enough, mundane notes about repairs and weather. But then it shifted. The tone darkened. The words turned bitter. Harold's entries described his obsession with Claire, his anger when she turned him away, and his growing conviction that she had ruined his life. The final entry was dated November 12, 1978, the day Claire vanished. It wasn't long, but it was clear. A confession written in guilt and fear. She screamed, "I didn't mean for it to happen. I buried the rest. God forgive me." Rowan closed the journal, hands shaking. There was no question anymore. Harold Sykes had killed Claire Jensen. He'd buried the truth behind the barn and taken it to his grave. Rowan drove to the nearest town that morning and turned the journal over to the sheriff's department. Within days, the county reopened the case. Harold Sykes had died years earlier, but his words were enough to close the file officially and give Claire's family the truth they'd been denied for nearly 50 years. When Rowan returned to the cabin to pack, the atmosphere had changed. The air felt lighter, warmer somehow. The silence was no longer heavy. The place that had once felt haunted now felt peaceful. Claire never appeared again. Rowan left the cabin the next day, the writing retreat over, but feeling that something far more important had been written into the world. An ending that had been waiting nearly half a century. Every November since, Rowan thinks of her. The woman in the photographs. The one who stood silently in the doorway and pointed the way toward justice. Wherever Claire Jensen's spirit may be now, Rowan hopes she finally rests in peace. Caleb and Marcus had been inseparable since middle school. They had grown up in the same neighborhood, attended the same high school, and eventually even shared the same college campus. Despite the ways adulthood tried to pull them apart with jobs, responsibilities, and the endless obligations of life, one tradition had never faltered: their annual November camping trip. It was their ritual, their way of reconnecting, of leaving behind the relentless noise of modern life to spend a few days in the forest like they used to as teenagers. But this year, unlike all the others, only one of them would return. They set out on a Friday afternoon in mid-November. Marcus drove his weathered pickup truck, camping gear heaped in the back like a mountain of memories. The weather was crisp and dry, the sort of cold that bites but invigorates. Perfect for a weekend immersed in nature. The state park was 3 hours north, an enormous stretch of dense woods, winding hiking trails, and secluded camping areas. During the summer, it teemed with families and tourists, but in November, especially on weekdays, the forest was nearly deserted. That was exactly what they wanted: isolation. Silence. The kind of calm only the wilderness could provide. By the time they arrived, the sun was dipping below the horizon, painting the sky with streaks of amber and violet. They checked in at the ranger station, paid for their campsite, and followed the dirt road that twisted into the heart of the park. Their chosen clearing was familiar. A circle of earth ringed by towering pines, a fire pit at its center, and a picnic table leaning slightly to one side. Setting up tents was almost instinctual. They moved with ease and familiarity, no words necessary, each anticipating the other's actions. By the time night fully descended, they had a fire crackling and beers in hand, sharing stories, jokes, and reflections on work, life, and everything in between. The first night passed without incident. They stayed up late, feeding logs into the flames, watching sparks spiral into the dark, starless sky. The cold pressed in around them, their breath fogging in the firelight, but the warmth of the fire made it bearable. Eventually, close to midnight, they retreated to their tents, zipped into sleeping bags, and fell asleep to the whisper of wind through the trees. Morning arrived bright and cold. Frost blanketed every surface, crunching under their boots as they moved around the campsite. Coffee was brewed on a portable stove, granola bars eaten without ceremony. By mid-morning, they had set out on one of the park's longer hiking loops. The forest was serene, alive only with the crunch of their steps and the occasional bird call. No other hikers, no rangers, just them, lost in the solitude that had drawn them here for years. By late afternoon, they returned to the campsite, tired but content. Darkness fell quickly in November, and they began preparing for dinner. Marcus volunteered to gather firewood while Caleb stoked the fire and arranged the food. It was a division of labor they had repeated countless times. Marcus took a flashlight, though the light was not yet needed, and disappeared into the woods toward a known cluster of fallen branches. Caleb watched him go, then knelt at the fire pit, arranging kindling, stacking logs, coaxing a small flame into life. He glanced at his watch. 4:30 p.m. The sun already cast long, somber shadows across the clearing. He estimated Marcus would return in 15 to 20 minutes. But minutes stretched. 20 passed, then 30, then 40. Caleb's unease grew. He called Marcus's name, the sound swallowed by the trees. Silence answered. By 5:15, night had fully fallen, and the forest pressed in around him. Caleb grabbed his flashlight and followed the path Marcus had taken, calling again. His voice sounded tiny, inconsequential, against the vast darkness. After 5 minutes of careful searching, he found the footprints. The ground, softened by recent rain, clearly bore Marcus's steps. Caleb's relief was brief. About 100 feet down the trail, the prints ended. Not gradually, not as if Marcus had stepped off the path. They simply stopped, as if the earth had swallowed him whole. Caleb froze, staring at the last imprint. No one just vanished. There had to be a reason, an explanation. Frantically, he shone the flashlight to the sides of the trail, searching for broken branches, displaced leaves, or footprints leading away. Nothing. Only the empty darkness and those final steps. Panic rose in his chest. He sprinted back to the campsite, grabbed his phone, and called Marcus. Straight to voicemail. Again. Straight to voicemail. Caleb called the ranger station, hands trembling. The voice on the line was calm, professional, but concern threaded through it. He was told to remain at the campsite. Rangers would come immediately. Within 30 minutes, 2 rangers arrived in a truck, their beams cutting through the darkness, radios crackling. Caleb led them to the trail, to the spot where the footprints had vanished. The rangers examined the ground carefully, expressions tightening. One radioed for backup, requesting a full-scale search. By midnight, the forest was alive with searchers, rangers, local police, volunteer rescue teams, even canine units. Dogs traced Marcus's scent from the campsite along the trail, only to stop at the same spot where the footprints had ended. The dogs circled, confused, unable to pick up the trail again. It was as if Marcus had been erased from the earth. The search continued through the night and into Sunday morning. Helicopters with thermal imaging flew above the treetops. Teams combed the forest systematically. Every inch was scrutinized. Yet nothing was found. No clothing, no blood, no signs of struggle. Marcus had disappeared completely. By Sunday afternoon, the operation was paused to regroup and plan next steps. Caleb was questioned extensively at the ranger station. He told the story repeatedly, but each retelling only emphasized the impossibility of what had happened. No answers were found, only a deep, gnawing dread. The investigation resumed Monday, now involving even more personnel. The FBI joined, intrigued by the strangeness of the disappearance. Caleb was interviewed again, his phone records examined, his history with Marcus scrutinized. But no crime had been committed. There was no motive, no evidence, no body. Marcus had simply vanished while gathering firewood. Weeks passed, then months. The case was officially deemed an unexplained disappearance. Caleb was left shattered. He blamed himself for not accompanying Marcus, for waiting at the campsite, for failing to notice warning signs. He replayed the afternoon repeatedly in his mind, searching desperately for a clue, a sign he could have acted on. But there was nothing. Marcus had gone into the woods as he always did, and never returned. Obsession overtook Caleb. He scoured records, reports, and news articles, looking for similar incidents in the park. To his horror, he discovered 3 others had vanished in the same forest over the past 40 years. All had occurred in November. All had left behind belongings or footprints that ended abruptly. No bodies were ever recovered. The victims were a solo hiker in the early 1980s, a park ranger in the 1990s, and a teenage girl on a school camping trip in 2005. Families of the missing shared identical frustrations. Exhaustive searches yielding nothing. Authorities stymied by the forest's impenetrable mystery. Some believed the park itself was haunted, a supernatural force claiming victims each November. Others suspected a cunning, unseen human predator. But no proof existed. Only the cold, raw fact remained. People disappeared in those woods, leaving behind endless questions. Caleb never returned to that park. The thought of walking those trails, standing in those clearings, was unbearable. Every November, as the days shortened and the chills set in, he pictured Marcus walking into the woods, stepping into a fate no one could explain. Had Marcus become lost? Had an accident occurred? Or had something beyond understanding claimed him? Caleb didn't know. What he did know was terrifyingly simple. Marcus had taken one step and then simply vanished, leaving nothing but footprints that ended abruptly in the mud. Even today, rangers quietly caution campers in November. They never speak of the woods as haunted, but there is a shared understanding. Something is not right in those forests. Most disappearances in parks have reasonable explanations, but cases like Marcus's defy logic. They remain unsolved mysteries, dark stains on the map, reminders that nature is not always safe, and that sometimes people vanish entirely, leaving only unanswered questions for those left behind. Being a single mother had never been part of Lily's life plan, but life had a way of throwing curveballs. 3 years had passed since her divorce, and she had learned to navigate the challenges of raising her 6-year-old daughter, Emma, on her own. They lived in a modest 2-bedroom house on the edge of town, a quiet neighborhood where kids still played outside until dusk, and neighbors greeted each other from porches. Money was tight, and the daily grind often felt relentless, but Lily had built a life she was proud of. She and Emma had routines, small joys, and a sense of safety that, until that night, had always been absolute. It was a chilly November Tuesday when everything changed. Darkness had settled unusually early, turning the street into a shadowed, almost empty world. Emma had been tucked in by 8:30, after a long day of school, play, and laughter, and Lily had kissed her goodnight before retreating to the living room to finish some work emails. The house was peaceful, silent except for the low hum of the refrigerator and the occasional groan of the old floorboards settling. She had always appreciated these quiet nights, moments when the chaos of the day softened and she could finally think clearly. Around 11, Lily decided a cup of tea would be the perfect nightcap before bed. She went to the kitchen, filled the kettle, and set it on the stove, her mind wandering over emails and unfinished tasks. Then, as if instinctively, she glanced out the window above the sink. The motion sensor light in the backyard was glowing, a rare occurrence. It usually triggered when a raccoon or neighborhood cat wandered by, but tonight the illumination made her pause. She squinted through the glass, watching the yard. The light went off. Probably just an animal, she whispered to herself, shaking off the unease. But seconds later, the light flickered on again, and there he was, a man, standing near the fence at the edge of the yard, barely visible in the dim glow. He didn't move. He didn't blink. He simply stared at the house. Lily's heart seized in her chest. She instinctively took a step back, breath shallow, mind racing through possibilities. Could it be a neighbor? Someone who had lost a dog? Yet something in her gut, cold and insistent, screamed, danger. Before she could formulate a plan, another figure appeared. A second man, across the street, partially obscured by a tree but clearly facing her home. Her stomach sank. 2 men, watching her. This was no coincidence. It was deliberate. Hands trembling, Lily dialed 911. She forced calm into her voice as she described what she saw. 2 men, one in the backyard and one across the street, seemingly observing her house. The dispatcher instructed her to lock all doors, turn off lights, and remain inside, assuring her that officers were en route. Lily ended the call and crept to Emma's bedroom, desperate to stay near her daughter without waking her. She sat in the dark beside Emma's bed, heart hammering, pulling out her phone. She accessed the security camera she had installed above the front door months ago, a purchase made on a whim during a sale, rarely used. The grainy black and white feed loaded on her screen, showing the porch and street. At first, nothing. Then, movement. The man across the street was approaching, stepping deliberately onto her lawn, then onto the porch. He tried the handle. Locked. Relief hit briefly, only to be replaced with terror as he moved to the living room window, testing it with deliberate force. Time stretched. 4 minutes since her 911 call felt like an eternity. A soft scraping from the back of the house confirmed her fears. The second man was attempting entry through the back, likely a door or window near Emma's room. Panic surged, sharp and biting. Lily rose, steadying herself, and peeked through Emma's bedroom curtain. The motion sensor light revealed him crouched at the window, a glinting metal tool in hand, trying to pry it open. If he succeeded, he would be right over her sleeping child. Adrenaline sharpened Lily's focus. She grabbed her phone, switched on the flashlight and shone it at him. The sudden beam illuminated his partially masked face, hoodie shadowing his features, bandana concealing most of his lower face, but his eyes, cold, calculated, met hers. For a breathless moment they stared at each other. Then, startled, he bolted, crashing through bushes along the side of the house and disappearing toward the street. At that instant, sirens screamed through the darkness, red and blue lights cutting jagged patterns across her windows. Police had arrived. Lily rushed to the front door, peering through the peephole as two patrol cars screeched to a halt. Officers jumped out, flashlights sweeping the yard. Trembling, she unlocked the door and stepped outside, recounting everything she had witnessed, showing the security footage and leading them to the points of attempted entry. Evidence was immediate and damning. Scratches on the back door frame where a pry tool had been forced, marks on Emma's window, and the very crowbar the intruder had dropped lay on the ground. Multiple sets of muddy footprints tracked from the alley behind the house to both attempted entry points. More officers arrived, dusted the security camera for prints, and began a thorough investigation. As the hours passed, Detective Morrison, one of the lead officers, explained what they believed. This was not random. The intruders had surveilled her home, knowing she lived alone with a child, targeting her specifically. Their coordinated approach indicated premeditation. "You were extremely lucky," Morrison said gently. "Had you not noticed them, the outcome could have been catastrophic." Over the next few days, the investigation deepened. Neighbors shared their own observations. A van parked for long stretches at night, moving slowly past Lily's house on several occasions, and unusual figures loitering nearby. Police traced the vehicle to a man with prior convictions for burglary and assault, arresting him and his accomplice within 48 hours. Inside the van, officers found meticulous notes detailing Lily's schedule, her routines, and which doors and windows were most vulnerable. They had been stalking her and several other single mothers for weeks, planning something far more sinister than a simple burglary. Both men were charged with attempted burglary, stalking, conspiracy, and attempted kidnapping. During sentencing, the prosecutor revealed their crimes were part of a larger operation targeting vulnerable women and children. The intent had been horrifying. The court hearings were difficult for Lily to endure, but the conviction brought a fragile sense of relief. Though the immediate danger had passed, fear lingered. Lily upgraded locks, installed additional cameras, began parking in the garage to mask her presence, and joined a neighborhood watch. She shared her experience to raise awareness, hoping other mothers would trust their instincts and take precautions. Emma slept through the ordeal, oblivious to the narrow escape, and Lily chose to shield her from the frightening details. But the memory of that night remained vivid. The darkness of November, the stillness of her quiet neighborhood, the sensation of being watched, every element etched into her mind. Evil, she realized, did not always announce itself with noise or chaos. Sometimes, it waited silently, testing boundaries and assessing vulnerabilities. And sometimes, survival depended entirely on vigilance, quick thinking, and courage in the moment. The weeks that followed brought reflection. Lily revisited the footage, replayed every movement, and felt a renewed sense of determination. She had acted. She had protected Emma. But she also understood how fragile safety could be, and how rapidly it could be threatened by forces unseen. The experience reshaped her sense of security, prompting her to reevaluate every routine and precaution she had once taken for granted. Months passed, and life gradually returned to a semblance of normal. Emma continued her routines, and Lily resumed work, cautiously optimistic, yet always aware of the lingering shadow of that night. The police investigation concluded successfully, the perpetrators convicted and imprisoned. But Lily's instincts remained finely tuned. She knew the world had not changed, only her awareness of it. Every November, as nights grew longer and colder, the memory resurfaced. She thought about the figures in the darkness, the cold precision of their eyes, and the thin line that had separated her family from danger. Though time had dulled the immediate terror, it had not erased the lesson. Vigilance is not optional, and courage sometimes manifests in quiet, split-second choices. Lily's story became more than a personal memory. It became a guiding principle. In her neighborhood, she shared her experience, helped implement stronger security measures, and encouraged awareness among parents, particularly single mothers. The ordeal, while traumatic, reinforced the importance of preparation, intuition, and the simple but profound act of noticing when something is wrong. Emma grew, blissfully unaware of how close her family had come to tragedy. And Lily, though scarred by the memory, took solace in the fact that she had faced fear directly, acted decisively, and safeguarded her child. The house, once a quiet refuge, had become a symbol of both vulnerability and resilience, a reminder that danger often arrives unannounced, and that courage, vigilance, and quick thinking can mean the difference between safety and catastrophe. Even years later, the memory of that November night remained vivid. Lily could still see the figures silhouetted against the dim light, feel the pounding of her heart, and hear the faint rustle of leaves beneath the fleeing intruder. Those sensations, once terrifying, had transformed into a source of awareness, teaching her to trust her instincts, respect her surroundings, and never underestimate the subtle signs that danger might be near. Wyatt had been following the same routine for nearly a decade. Every weekday, he would climb into his truck in the suburbs, drive roughly 45 minutes to the factory where he worked the evening shift, and then make the return trip well past midnight. The repetition of it all could have been mind-numbing, even soul-crushing. But the paycheck was solid, and the benefits dependable. Over time, he had grown to appreciate the quiet that came with the late-night drives. The stretches of empty asphalt illuminated only by moonlight, and the occasional glimmer of distant farmhouses. November was Wyatt's favorite month for these drives. The air was crisp and biting, the roads free of the congestion that plagued spring and summer. Darkness seemed to drape over the countryside in a way that made everything feel removed from the hustle of the daytime world. There was a certain comfort in that solitude, a rhythm that Wyatt had come to crave. Yet, one November evening would shatter that comfort in a way he would never forget, leaving questions that have haunted him ever since. It was a Thursday in the third week of November. Wyatt's shift ended at 11:45 p.m. He punched out, exchanged brief nods and goodnights with the few coworkers still lingering on the factory floor, and stepped into the cold evening air. His breath formed clouds in the chill, and the parking lot was eerily still. Unlocking his truck, he climbed inside, the engine coughing to life before settling into a deep, steady rumble. He merged onto the rural highway that would lead him home, a 2-lane ribbon of asphalt weaving through open fields and scattered woods. By day, this road could feel mundane. Tractors plodded across fields, and farmers might be tending to the last crops of the season. By night, however, it was entirely different. The quiet stretched in all directions. Wyatt flicked on the radio, finding a classic rock station to accompany him, and settled into the familiar hum of the engine. The first 20 minutes were routine. He passed the same landmarks he always did. The abandoned gas station with broken windows. The weathered barn with a faded advertisement painted on its side. The small bridge spanning the creek. Each sight brought a sense of ordinary comfort, the familiarity anchoring him in the world. Then, about halfway through the journey, Wyatt noticed something unusual in his rearview mirror. There were lights, but not the ordinary glare of headlights or street lamps. These were bright, piercing, almost searing in their intensity. They shimmered and pulsed in a way that made it difficult to focus directly on them. At first, Wyatt assumed another car had its high beams on, a distracted driver some distance behind him. But the lights behaved strangely. They hovered above the road, maintaining a height that no ordinary vehicle could achieve. They stayed parallel with his truck, mimicking every movement as though they were tethered to him. Instinctively, Wyatt pressed the accelerator, nudging his truck from 55 to 60, then 65 miles per hour. Yet, no matter how fast he went, the lights remained. Closer than ever, keeping pace with uncanny precision. His pulse quickened. This was not normal, not even remotely. He glanced at the side mirror, hoping for a better perspective, but all he could see were the ethereal, impossible beams, moving with intent, almost as if they were alive. Trying a different approach, Wyatt eased off the gas, letting the truck decelerate to 40, then 30 miles per hour. The lights mirrored him, slowing with each reduction in speed, maintaining the same relative distance. Panic began to take hold. Thoughts of pulling over crossed his mind, but the idea of stopping with those lights hovering directly behind him was unbearable. Clutching the steering wheel, knuckles pale and trembling, he pressed on. Then, without warning, the lights shifted. They surged forward, accelerating faster than any known vehicle could, coming up alongside him on the driver's side. Heart hammering, Wyatt risked a glance, and what he saw made him shiver through and through. There was no vehicle. No wheels, no chassis, no discernible source. Just pure, luminous light floating in midair. Within the radiance, faint shapes seemed to appear and dissolve, forms that twisted and reshaped themselves without ever solidifying. A strange, tingling sensation crept up the back of Wyatt's neck, crawling down his spine. His radio began to malfunction. The music sputtered and vanished, replaced by a high-pitched whining that pierced his ears. Then, as abruptly as they had arrived, the lights shot forward, disappearing into the black expanse ahead in a blink. Wyatt exhaled shakily, staring at the empty road ahead, mind grappling with the impossible. The dashboard clock read 12:37 a.m. Only minutes, or so it felt, had passed. But Wyatt could not reconcile what he had just experienced. He continued, cautious but still rattled. Perhaps it was some experimental drone, he reasoned. Perhaps military aircraft conducting tests. Maybe fatigue had caused his mind to fabricate the event. But rational explanations failed to fit the enormity of what he had seen. Something beyond ordinary comprehension had crossed his path. As he drove, Wyatt began noticing further anomalies. Familiar landmarks were appearing out of order. The bridge over the creek came before the old barn, contradicting his normal memory of the route. Distances between fields and tree lines felt unnaturally elongated, stretching the road into a warped, almost alien version of itself. He checked the clock again. It read 11:15. Impossible. Only a few minutes had elapsed, or so it seemed, but the instrument insisted nearly 40 minutes had passed. Disorientation gnawed at him. Home should have been just ahead, the turn for his neighborhood looming. Yet the highway stretched endlessly, a corridor of darkness, familiar yet distorted. Trees were thicker than usual. Fields seemed infinite, and the night sky above was a void, black without a single star. The sense of isolation pressed down on him, almost tactile, heavy with dread. Finally, after what seemed like hours but was, by the clock, 20 more minutes, Wyatt spotted the exit for his neighborhood. Relief surged as he navigated the turn, tires squealing lightly against the asphalt. He wound through familiar streets, passing neighbors' homes, until reaching his driveway. Sliding the truck into park, he paused, attempting to steady his breathing. Then he looked at the dashboard clock once more. 2:43 a.m. He had left work at 11:45. The trip home normally required 45 minutes, 50 at most. Yet here it was, 2 hours and 58 minutes. Nearly 3 hours unaccounted for. Wyatt's stomach knotted. Where had he been? What had occurred during the missing time? His memory offered nothing but fragments. The lights, the pulsing glow, the overwhelming sense of unearthly observation. Compelled to inspect the truck, Wyatt circled it. Horror clenched him. The driver's side door bore a long scratch, running from the handle to the rear panel, surrounded by paint singed as if subjected to extreme heat. He ran his hand over it repeatedly. How could this have happened? He had no recollection of contact, no memory of collision or brush. A shiver ran through him, a mixture of fear and confusion. Sleep proved impossible. Wyatt lay awake that night, mind replaying every moment. The lights, the distorted road, the missing hours, and the damage, all interlaced into a pattern that resisted explanation. By morning, he called his wife, who was out of town. Her suggestion, that he might have dozed at the wheel, was quickly dismissed in his mind. He had been alert, terrified, conscious the entire time. Wyatt began research, scouring the internet for similar accounts. To his surprise, he discovered dozens of reports from drivers along that same highway, all in November, all describing eerie lights that followed their vehicles, periods of missing time, and unexplained damage to cars. Some speculated extraterrestrial involvement, others military testing, while many had no explanation beyond the inexplicable. He contacted several of these people. Their experiences mirrored his own. The lights appeared during late-night November drives, targeted solitary vehicles, and left witnesses with distorted time perception, profound disorientation, and an underlying sense of fear. One woman reported unexplainable marks on her body after an encounter. Another man's car electronics were permanently disabled for no apparent reason. Wyatt never returned to that highway at night. He requested a transfer to a daytime shift. When denied, he found employment closer to home. The route, once mundane, had become a locus of terror. Even years later, he has no answers. The lights, the missing time, the damage, they remain unsolved, enigmatic, and deeply unsettling. Occasionally, Wyatt wonders about other drivers traversing that stretch in darkness, unaware of the phenomena that may await. Are the lights still there? He asks himself. Do they continue to follow, observe, and manipulate time in ways humans cannot comprehend? Will anyone ever understand? Or will this highway remain forever a site of unexplainable mystery? Its November nights hiding secrets beyond the reach of reason. Eleanor had called the same neighborhood home for more than 2 decades. She had purchased her house in her 30s, a modest but inviting bungalow tucked along a quiet street shaded by towering oak trees. Over the years, she had watched the community evolve. Families moving in and moving on, children growing up and leaving for college, elderly residents passing quietly in their sleep. Yet the neighborhood itself had maintained its character, a safe, welcoming place where people knew one another by name, kept an eye out for each other, and trusted that the world beyond their tree-lined street posed no immediate threat. That sense of security had never been questioned. At least, not until one chilly November evening when Eleanor went out for her routine walk with her dog Copper, and stumbled upon a discovery that would reopen one of the community's most haunting mysteries. Copper was a rescue beagle who had been with Eleanor for many years. Age had slowed him down, and his walks had grown shorter over time, but his need for the evening ritual remained unchanged. On this particular night, the third Tuesday of November, Eleanor bundled herself into her thick coat and fastened Copper's leash to his collar. The clock had just struck 6, and darkness had already claimed the neighborhood. The air was sharp and cold, each exhaled breath forming a visible cloud that vanished into the night. Most of her neighbors had already retreated indoors, their windows glowing like warm beacons against the surrounding darkness. Eleanor and Copper followed their usual path along the sidewalk, passing familiar homes in the gentle curve of the street toward the small park at the block's end. Yet Copper behaved oddly that evening. He tugged more than usual, nose pressed to the ground, sniffing frantically at something Eleanor could not sense. The dog's agitation grew as they neared the corner lot where the old Henderson property stood, a lot long abandoned and neglected. The house had been demolished 5 years prior after falling into severe disrepair, leaving only an overgrown expanse of earth enclosed by a chain-link fence, slowly consumed by weeds and vines. Copper pulled Eleanor toward the fence, whining and scratching at the ground near a gap where the metal had been bent outward. Eleanor attempted to reel him back, but the dog's determination proved unexpectedly strong. Then she saw what had seized his attention. The soil near the fence was freshly turned, a patch that seemed to stand out against the rest of the lot, littered with dead leaves and wild grass. Eleanor felt a shiver of unease. Something about it was wrong. She pulled out her phone and activated the flashlight, directing the beam through the gap in the fence. The disturbed ground was larger than she had initially thought, spanning roughly 3 feet in width. And there, partially uncovered at the edge of the soil, was something that made her chest tighten with dread. It looked like a piece of fabric, grimy and torn, but unmistakably cloth. Nearby, something small and metallic gleamed faintly in the flashlight's beam. Eleanor's hands trembled. This was far from ordinary. This was not a random anomaly in the soil. She drew Copper back from the fence and took in the isolation of the spot. The nearest house with lights on was 2 lots away, and the empty street amplified her vulnerability. Her heart hammered in her chest. Eleanor dialed 911, voice shaking as she relayed her findings. Within 10 minutes, patrol cars arrived, lights flashing but sirens silent, gliding up to the curb. Eleanor met the officers at the street, Copper secured to a nearby lamppost. She directed them to the disturbed patch, prompting them to request additional units. Within the hour, the entire lot was surrounded with police tape, portable floodlights illuminating the area as investigators began their work. Eleanor provided a statement to a detective, a composed, middle-aged woman named Sarah Chen, who listened intently, pen in hand, eyes focused. When Eleanor mentioned her decades-long residence in the neighborhood, Chen's expression shifted. She asked Eleanor if she recalled a girl named Ashley Moreno, who had vanished from the neighborhood back in November of 2010. Eleanor's stomach lurched. Of course she remembered Ashley. The disappearance had been unforgettable, etched into the collective memory of everyone in the community. Ashley Moreno had been 16, popular and bright, a student whose presence had lit up her local high school. On November 18, 2010, she left home in the late afternoon to walk to a friend's house just a few blocks away, and never arrived. Her parents reported her missing that evening, prompting a massive search. Officers, volunteers, and search dogs combed every street, alley, and surrounding area for weeks. Yet Ashley had vanished without a trace. There were no witnesses, no tangible leads. The case eventually went cold, leaving the neighborhood with unanswered questions and lingering fear. Her family never stopped hoping, never stopped searching. But most residents reluctantly accepted that Ashley's fate would likely remain a mystery. Now, 15 years later, Eleanor stood before the old Henderson lot, frozen, watching as police unearthed secrets buried beneath the soil. When the original search had been conducted in 2010, the house still stood, inhabited by Frank Henderson, an elderly man questioned and ultimately cleared by authorities. He had passed away 7 years ago, leaving the property to decay until the city eventually demolished it. Now, beneath the ground that had once supported the house, evidence suggested that Ashley Moreno had never truly left the neighborhood. Eleanor could not look away. She remained behind the yellow police tape as investigators meticulously excavated the area, brushing away the earth layer by layer. And then, as midnight approached, the discovery was made that confirmed every chilling suspicion. Human bones, carefully uncovered, alongside a backpack still bearing a name tag. Ashley Moreno. News of the discovery spread quickly. By morning, every major media outlet was reporting the breakthrough. The long unsolved case of Ashley Moreno had finally been resolved. Her remains had been found, hidden for 15 years on the old Henderson property. Immediate attention turned to Frank Henderson, the property owner at the time of Ashley's disappearance. He was deceased and could never face trial, but detectives delved into his past. What they uncovered was unsettling. Henderson had been a reclusive man, keeping to himself for decades, but prior records revealed a criminal history. In the 1970s, he had been arrested for attempted kidnapping, serving a brief sentence due to plea agreements. He relocated to the neighborhood in the early 1980s, maintaining a low profile. Neighbors remembered him as peculiar yet harmless, someone you would nod to but rarely engage in conversation with. The forensic evidence painted a grim picture. Ashley had been buried in a shallow grave behind the house, concealed by a shed that Henderson had kept on the property. The shed had been removed when the house was demolished, exposing the burial site. Items found with her remains suggested she had been held captive for an extended period, possibly in the house's basement before her death. The realization that she had been so close to her home, hidden just a few houses from her parents, was devastating. Ashley's family finally received closure, able to lay her to rest properly. But justice could not be served. The perpetrator was gone. Eleanor, credited with uncovering the remains, was publicly praised, yet she felt no heroism. She was haunted by the knowledge that Ashley had been there for 15 years, while life went on around her. Eleanor reflected on every walk past that lot, every glance at the old house, and the thought that Ashley's presence had been silently enduring all those years. The investigation continued for months. Authorities employed ground-penetrating radar to survey the remainder of the property, fearing additional victims. Fortunately, no further discoveries were made. Ashley appeared to be Henderson's sole victim on the property. However, the case prompted a review of other unsolved disappearances linked to locations where Henderson had previously lived. Several cold cases were reopened, though no conclusive connections were confirmed. The possibility that Henderson had committed further crimes lingered as an unsettling reality. Eventually, the old lot was sold to a developer for new construction. Before work could begin, a memorial was placed. A simple stone marker engraved with Ashley's name and dates, a solemn reminder of the tragedy that had unfolded there. Eleanor visited often, bringing flowers, standing in quiet contemplation. Copper remained at her side, calm and patient, as if he understood the weight of what he had helped reveal. Eleanor never stopped reflecting on that November evening. She remembered how Copper had led her to the fence, the disturbed soil, the piece of fabric peeking from the earth. She considered fate and chance, realizing how a single walk, a single tug from her dog, had changed the course of many lives. Without that night, without Copper's insistence, Ashley might have remained hidden indefinitely. Her parents might never have known the truth. The neighborhood slowly returned to its rhythm, yet it was forever altered. People locked doors more diligently. Parents kept closer watch over their children, and those who had lived there in 2010 carried the knowledge that malevolence had once hidden in plain sight. Eleanor bore that weight as well. Yet she also carried the understanding that even in the darkest circumstances, justice could prevail. Ashley had been found. She had been returned, if only in spirit, to her community. And the truth, though painful, had emerged at last. On a frigid November evening, 15 years after she had disappeared. Andrew had been behind the wheel for almost 6 consecutive hours when he finally decided he could not drive another mile without a break. It was late November, well past the midnight hour, and he was returning from a Thanksgiving visit with family. The highway stretched ahead like an endless ribbon of black asphalt, cutting through the countryside that lay shrouded in darkness. His eyelids felt heavy, his focus waning. He needed coffee, or at the very least a brief respite to stretch his legs and shake off the creeping fatigue. When he spotted the small sign for an upcoming rest area just 2 miles ahead, a sense of relief washed over him. Finally, he could pull over, use the restroom, grab a cup of coffee from the vending machine, and then push on for the final leg of his journey. The rest stop was one of those typical interstate facilities, a simple building housing restrooms, a few vending machines inside, and a couple of picnic tables just outside. At this late hour, the lot was nearly deserted, with only 3 other vehicles parked under the cold, unwelcoming glare of fluorescent lights. Andrew maneuvered his car into an empty spot near the building, turned off the engine, and sat for a moment. The silence felt almost tangible, broken only by the faint hum of distant traffic. The chill in the air bit immediately when he opened the door, each gust of cold pressing against his body with sharp intensity. He stepped out and began walking toward the restroom building, his breath forming clouds in the frosty air, his footsteps echoing across the quiet lot. As he neared the facility, something at the edge of the rest area caught his eye. By the tree line bordering the lot, a figure stood alone. A woman, dressed in what looked like a thin jacket that offered little protection from the November cold, remained motionless. She faced the dense woods beyond, where darkness swallowed everything beyond the reach of the lot's harsh lights. Andrew slowed his pace, his curiosity piqued, but an unease settled in his chest. There was something wrong about her stillness. She stood exactly where the artificial light from the parking lot began to fade, half in shadow, half illuminated. From this distance he could not make out her face clearly, but he could tell she was young, perhaps in her 20s or early 30s. Long, dark hair cascaded down her back. Andrew watched silently, sensing that this was no ordinary pedestrian wandering late at night. Then, slowly, she tilted her head and for an instant, their eyes met. Even from 50 feet away, he could read the expression on her face. It was not exactly fear, but something very close, a mixture of distress and confusion. Her eyes were wide, her lips parted slightly, as if she wanted to speak but could not summon the words. The brief eye contact made Andrew's stomach tighten. Almost as suddenly as it began, the moment ended. She turned back toward the forest, taking her first deliberate steps among the trees. Andrew felt a jolt of alarm surge through him. No one wandered into that dense, unlit forest from a highway rest stop in the dead of night. The trees were close together, their bare branches intertwining overhead, forming a black canopy that swallowed all light. There was no trail, no clear path. It was unnatural, inexplicable. "Hey, are you okay?" Andrew called, his voice cutting across the night. "Miss, wait!" But there was no response. She did not even glance back. She continued moving, slipping between the trunks, her form disappearing into the darkness almost immediately. Andrew froze, heart pounding, mind racing. Should he follow her? Should he wait for help? What if she was in danger, fleeing someone or something? Or worse, suffering a medical emergency, lost to confusion or a seizure? His fingers trembled as he pulled out his phone, quickly dialing 911. He spoke rapidly to the dispatcher, describing the woman and giving his exact location. The dispatcher instructed him to remain at the edge of the forest and avoid entering the woods. Police and park rangers were on their way. But Andrew could not stand still. He had made eye contact with her, shared a moment of connection that made him feel accountable. Activating his phone's flashlight, he stepped past the tree line, calling out once more. "I just want to help. The police are coming, please, come back." Beyond the reach of the flashlight, darkness stretched like a living thing. The trees pressed close, branches bare and skeletal, their jagged forms looming overhead. The forest floor was blanketed in dead leaves, crisp and brittle underfoot, making each step a loud crack in the silent night. He moved cautiously, sweeping the beam in front of him, searching for any sign of the woman. She had vanished. There was no sound of movement, no rustling branches, no footprints, no whisper of disturbance in the undergrowth. Nothing. Andrew had only advanced about 30 feet when a detail froze him in place. The ground ahead, dusted with a thin layer of snow that had fallen earlier that evening, was pristine except for one striking anomaly. His own footprints were etched clearly in the snow, marking his path with perfect detail. Yet there were no other prints. None. The woman had walked into the woods just moments ago. If she had been real, there should have been a trail of footprints marking her passage. But the snow remained undisturbed, untouched by her presence. Andrew's pulse raced as he frantically scanned the white ground, hoping for some trace of her, but the snow remained empty. It was as though she had never existed, as if she had simply dissolved into the darkness. Panic rose in his chest. This defied logic, defied reality. He spun in a circle, flashlight beam slicing through the blackness, calling again, voice echoing between the trees. "Where are you? Please, answer me." Only silence replied. Then, in the distance, the faint wail of approaching sirens pierced the night. Trembling, Andrew retreated through the forest, his legs weak and unsteady, until he emerged back into the parking lot. 2 police cruisers and a park ranger vehicle had arrived. He relayed everything to the officers, words tumbling out in a rush. He described the woman, the moment of eye contact, her movement into the forest, and the inexplicable lack of footprints. The officers listened, concern and disbelief crossing their faces. One asked him to demonstrate the entry point. He led them to the tree line, and together they swept powerful flashlights across the snow. The scene matched Andrew's account perfectly. His footprints were clear, but no other impressions marked the ground. A park ranger shook his head in disbelief. "This is impossible," he muttered. If someone walked here, there would be tracks. The snow shows nothing but your steps. Despite the impossibility, a search was conducted. Officers fanned out, combing the woods with flashlights, calling out, breaking the silence. 30 minutes passed. Nothing. No footprints, no signs of struggle, no indication that anyone had been in those woods besides Andrew. Finally, an officer approached Andrew quietly. "Maybe you were just exhausted," he suggested. "Your eyes could have played tricks. Shadows can look like people." Andrew shook his head. He had seen her clearly. He had locked eyes with a real, living woman who had walked into those woods. The officers recorded his statement, checked for recent missing person reports, and then the room fell into tense silence when they found one. 3 days prior, a woman named Jennifer Caldwell had been reported missing from a town roughly 40 miles away. She was 29, had long dark hair, and had last been seen wearing a light jacket. Andrew's description matched perfectly. The search escalated. K-9 units scoured the area the next morning. Helicopters with thermal imaging canvassed the treetops. Community volunteers joined in. Yet despite all efforts, nothing was found. No body, no clothing, no clue that Jennifer Caldwell had ever been at that rest stop. The case officially remained open, a missing person investigation without leads. Andrew could not let it go. He spent months researching her disappearance, contacting her family, trying to piece together what had happened. They were grateful someone had potentially seen her, but devastated by the lack of answers. Where had she gone? How had she ended up at a highway rest stop in the dead of night? And most urgently, where was she now? Months became years, and the trail grew cold. Jennifer Caldwell was never located. Andrew replayed that night endlessly in his mind. The woman at the forest edge. The way she had looked at him. The moment she had vanished without a trace. Every detail haunted him. He knew, with a certainty that defied reason, that what he had seen was not a trick of fatigue. He had watched a woman disappear into the woods, leaving no evidence, no tracks, no explanation. The only conclusion that even remotely made sense was impossible. He had witnessed her disappearance as it happened. Whether she had been taken, transported to another dimension, or something more sinister had occurred, he would never know. Yet each November, when darkness falls early and the cold seeps into the bones, Andrew cannot help but think of Jennifer Caldwell, wandering in the snow-covered woods, and wonders where she went that frozen night. Natalie had always thought of herself as careful. She wasn't the type to take unnecessary chances or put herself in risky situations. At 32, her life felt stable. She had a solid career, a supportive group of friends, and a routine that offered a sense of safety. She had heard the cautionary tales. Women who went missing, who were attacked, who trusted the wrong person at the wrong moment. But, like most people, she had never imagined that such a fate could ever touch her. That illusion of security shattered one frigid November evening when her car refused to cooperate on a rural highway, and she made a choice that nearly cost her everything. It was the second week of November. Natalie had been driving home from a conference held in a city roughly 2 hours away. The event had run longer than expected, and by the time she got back on the road, it was already past 9 o'clock. The highway was quiet, a long ribbon of asphalt cutting through sparsely populated countryside. Only the occasional truck rumbled past in the opposite lane, its headlights brief flashes against the dark. About an hour into her drive, Natalie felt a sudden loss of power. The engine coughed and sputtered, the dashboard lights flickering erratically. Despite pressing the accelerator, the car slowed, reluctant to move. With effort, she managed to coast onto the shoulder just as the engine gave out completely. Natalie sat in the darkness, her chest tightening, trying in vain to restart the car. Nothing happened. The engine refused to turn over. She checked her phone. One bar of signal blinked at her, a hopeless number for making reliable calls. She tried anyway, dialing roadside assistance, but the call cut out before anyone could answer. She tried a second time with the same result. Anxiety crept in, curling around her stomach like a cold hand. She was stranded on an isolated road, miles from help, with almost no way to summon it. For 15 minutes, she sat silently, watching the occasional headlights pass without stopping. Then, headlights appeared behind her. A car pulled up slowly, and Natalie felt a mix of relief and unease. She watched as a man stepped out and approached her vehicle. He looked to be middle-aged, perhaps in his 50s, with a friendly face and a warm, easy smile. He knocked gently on her window. Natalie rolled it down slightly. "Having car trouble?" he asked, his tone casual but concerned. Natalie explained that her engine had died and that she could barely get a signal to call for help. The man introduced himself as David, claiming he was a mechanic, and offered to inspect the engine. Natalie hesitated only for a moment. He seemed harmless enough, and she desperately needed assistance. David opened the hood, flashlight in hand, making quiet noises of concern as he examined the engine. After a few minutes, he stepped back and delivered the verdict. The problem was serious, something with the alternator or the battery, and the car would not start without professional help. He offered to drive her to the nearest town, where she could call a tow truck and perhaps find a place to stay for the night. Natalie weighed her options. She could remain stranded on the dark highway until morning, or she could accept help from a stranger. Rational thought warred with her growing apprehension, but practicality won. She grabbed her purse and phone and slid into the passenger seat of David's dark, nondescript sedan. Initially, the ride felt ordinary. David engaged in small talk, asking her about the conference and her work. Natalie answered politely, keeping her responses short, a quiet voice inside reminding her to stay alert. As they drove, unease began to gnaw at her. David wasn't taking the most direct route. The nearest town, he had said, was 15 minutes away, but 20 minutes into the journey, they were traveling farther from the highway, deeper into rural territory. Natalie kept her tone casual, masking her concern, and asked where they were headed. David reassured her they were taking a shortcut, that this road would connect to the main route into town. She glanced at her phone's GPS and felt her stomach drop. They were moving in the wrong direction. She tried again, asking him to clarify. This time, his friendly demeanor vanished, replaced with something colder, sterner. He told her to stop worrying, that he knew exactly where he was going. A wave of pure terror washed over Natalie. She was trapped in a car with someone who had intentionally steered her into isolation. Panic threatened to overwhelm her, but she forced herself to stay calm. Any mistake now could be fatal. She noticed that the doors were not locked, a small comfort. Her hand hovered over the handle, ready to leap out at the first opportunity. But David seemed attuned to her fear, pressing down on the accelerator as the car hurtled along the narrow, dark road. Natalie realized her only chance was to humanize herself, to keep him talking, to appeal to whatever humanity remained in him. She began asking questions, sounding calm, interested, engaged. She spoke of her family, her mother expecting her call, her brother, a police officer. She invented details, anything to make him hesitate or rethink whatever he was planning. David listened without responding. His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, jaw clenched, eyes fixed on the road. The vehicle turned onto a more desolate path, barely more than a dirt track slicing through dense forest. That was when Natalie spotted her chance. Up ahead, a stop sign loomed at a small intersection. David would have to slow down. She braced herself, hand on the door handle, body coiled like a spring. As the car decelerated, she yanked the handle and flung herself out. The ground was unforgiving, gravel and dirt scraping her shoulders and hips, pain lancing through her body, but she did not hesitate. She scrambled to her feet and bolted, plunging into the woods beside the road. Shouts erupted behind her. She heard David's voice, the slam of his car door. She did not look back. Branches tore at her clothing and scraped her skin, her breath coming in ragged, desperate gasps. She ran until her legs faltered, collapsing behind the trunk of a massive tree, trembling violently. Her hands shook as she pulled out her phone. 1 bar. Enough to call for help. She dialed 911, forcing her voice to stay steady, relaying her position as best she could from the GPS. She explained that she had escaped an abductor who might still be nearby. The dispatcher instructed her to remain on the line, that police were on their way. Minutes stretched into agonizing hours as Natalie waited, hidden in the dark, straining to hear any sign of David. Then, flashing lights pierced the trees. Multiple police vehicles arrived, and within moments, officers had located her and ushered her to safety. Detective Joshua Martinez was assigned as lead investigator. A veteran with over 15 years of experience, he immediately recognized that Natalie's case was not random. He interviewed her thoroughly, documenting every detail about David, the car, and the route he had taken. Using the description and the partial license plate Natalie had glimpsed, he ran a check that sent chills down his spine. The car was registered to a man named David Kellerman, who had multiple prior arrests for assault and harassment. More disturbingly, Kellerman matched the profile of a suspect in several unsolved attacks on women across 3 counties, all occurring in November over the past 5 years. The pattern was consistent. Women stranded with car trouble or walking alone at night, offered help by a friendly stranger, then driven to secluded locations where they were assaulted. 2 women had been killed. 3 others had narrowly survived. Joshua issued an immediate warrant for Kellerman's arrest and initiated a multi-state manhunt. His vehicle was eventually found abandoned along a rural road. Kellerman himself had fled, but after 3 days, authorities located him at a motel 2 states away. A search of his room revealed horrors that made Joshua's blood run cold. A duffel bag contained rope, duct tape, a knife, and a collection of trophies, items linked to his victims. Jewelry, driver's licenses, photographs, and a notebook cataloged meticulously with names, dates, and locations chronicled his crimes. David Kellerman was arrested and charged with multiple counts of kidnapping, assault, and murder. The evidence was overwhelming. He ultimately pleaded guilty to avoid the death penalty. Investigators discovered that Kellerman had targeted women in November for years, exploiting darkness and cold to his advantage. That month had been his hunting season. He carefully observed for women alone, those stranded or desperate enough to accept help from a stranger. Natalie's testimony proved critical in securing his conviction. Though reliving her terror repeatedly in depositions and courtroom appearances was agonizing, she endured it, knowing her survival had protected other women. Her courage had brought a predator to justice. Detective Martinez remained in contact with her long after the case concluded, praising her bravery and quick thinking. Her actions had not only saved herself but ended a reign of terror. Natalie did not feel heroic. She felt fortunate, haunted, and irrevocably changed. Therapy helped her process the trauma, allowing her to slowly rebuild her life. Yet, she never forgot the lesson she had learned. Evil does not always announce itself with menace. Sometimes, it wears a friendly smile, offering help. And survival depends on instinct and courage in moments of instinctive danger. Today, Natalie shares her story publicly, advocating for women's safety and encouraging people to trust their intuition. She tells it not to frighten, but to empower. She survived, and because of her survival, David Kellerman will never harm another person. That November night had been the darkest of her life, yet it had revealed a strength she never knew existed. And for that, despite everything, she was profoundly grateful.